also we heard complaints from some stores or some areas of locations. So we had asked them to not to do that and stay where the laws are and stay with the community right now, because this is the time where we can come together and help the community. A lot of education part where we had asked our members to talk to your landlords, and when the financial crisis happen, if your business is not there, if they cannot pay the rent, then this is the way they can at least ask their landlords to lower the rent, or at least give them break for a few months or so at least they can help their businesses financial side of the business. Even some of the biggest boxes, like just like we have a property in Gama where our tenant is Salvation Army. They already sent us that request for lowering the rent, or even not paying for a month or two. So things are happening out there. These big big chains or big companies, whoever has a financial crisis, they are start taking advantage of this, and helping the business out there. So we are also urge our members to do same. At the same time, also the bank loans, where a lot of members owns the property or has the loan for the businesses, they can go to their bankers and either lower the interest rate, or get some time off to not pay any payments until they come again, able to make the payments. The biggest challenge right now, I think, the procurement side, where we cannot get all the deliveries at the stores, especially core item milk, bread, water is very important, and then of course the other core item for this in this case, which is sanitizers and wipes, paper towel, is coming, but it's coming in very limited quantity. And even at the some of the warehouses, we had receiving the deliveries from the vendors, but it's also come limited, so we have to allot to all the members. So we had limit on all the items. Even if you can see today at the big boxes at HEB, Sam's, Costco, they also place a limit on each item, especially those bread, milk, paper towel. They are putting only one limit per customer, and that's the biggest challenge we have. The other challenge I'm worried about, and as NATA we worry about for the TA member, is if the lockdown happened, then how we can secure our businesses. And I talked to Chairman Rahim this morning that some of the stores are 24-hour store. They don't have alarm system since they are 24-hour store, and they're trying to reach the alarm company, but uh, alarm companies also shorten, or they have already scheduled some other work, so they cannot come out and place that alarm system and all that. So that's also that if someone from National Council or Council or anybody has access to talk to these companies around Texas or any other TAs, we can help the member out that way. It's just we are preparing for in advance if that happen. And employee wise, I think we are blessed right now. We don't see any challenges from any TA that where they have a shortage of employees. Maybe few TAs or few members have might that challenge, but overall, I didn't heard, or we didn't heard that complaint from anybody, or challenge from anybody. So I'll pause here and I'll ask Vice Chair to chime in right at this point, and he can add more.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Hope everyone can hear me. So I'll talk more about the C-store industry and exactly where we at and what we are hearing so far. We are having numerous calls over the last few days with different group and different individuals. And we have got a lot of information of what is going out there from a C-store industry perspective. I'll talk more about the Southeast region because I am more aware about the Southeast region than any other region. So from a Southeast region perspective and C-store perspective, I think we're, especially from this week, we're seeing a tremendous amount of slowdown starting from Monday. Till last week, I think everything was okay. And all the sales, outside sales and inside sales were fine. But from Monday onwards, we have seen a tremendous decline, especially in the gas sales. And every one of us know majority is because the foot traffic is not coming in anymore because everybody's working from home and there are nobody burning gas anymore. So even with the gas prices as low as it is, we are not selling a lot of fuel because people are working from home, and especially the hotted areas are locations where a lot of offices are around that place. So people are working from home, and those are the locations which are hardly hit compared to the locations, for example, near the interstate, or even in our residential areas. So those has been a tremendous slowdown over the period of last 4 or 5 days. A lot of information we're getting from our members that they are saying that they are really afraid of what's going to happen in the future and how long this slowdown is going to happen, whether we're talking about 2-3 weeks or whether we are talking about 2 or 3 months. That's a lot of concern that we are hearing from a lot of our members. With that said, there are a lot of other positive things that members can do from the Bill's perspective. And I don't want to steal the thunder from David Joffer and Jackie, who's on the line, and who'll talk more about the bank loans. But I'll just give an overview. Some of the options that the members have right now that they can call their banks, especially if they have the property and the ownership of the building. They can talk to the banks of deferring their payments for another 6 to 8 months or 9 months or whatever work for them for the particular location. So that's one of the things that a member can do to get a deferred payment for those locations. Second thing a member can do is interest only payment. So they can call their bank and talk to their bank about interest only payment for another 6-8 months. So if they are paying a high note of $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a month, then if interest only payment comes, that payment usually reduce almost to half the original amount. So that's one of the things that the members can do. Another thing is refinancing. I think it's a very good time to refinance, whether it's commercial refinancing or even a residential refinancing, because of the interest rate. So those are some of the things that member can do if they own a property and if they own the real estate, and if they have a lot of mortgage payments that is coming on a regular basis, since the sales are down tremendously, the gas sales and inside sales. So I think this is one of the options that members can approach. Rental, on the other hand, is a different story, and I think David will talk more about rental and what we can do and what options does the member has in properties and locations where they are renting their store instead of owning the store and the property. So I'll let David chime in on that when he comes. Another concern challenge that we're hearing from our members is employee retention. Due to these things, there are some concern from some membership that a lot of employees are not feeling safe in working behind the counter, because C-store is more prone to some of those concerns and some of those diseases, because we are directly in contact with so many people on a regular basis. Unlike people working in offices, they don't get that many people coming to their offices compared to C-store industry. So I think that's a big concern that a lot of employees are having, and members also having a concern from the other side, because if there are no sales, they are not generating revenue, and if there are no revenue, it's hard to retain those employees. So it is working both ways. Sometimes it's from the member's perspective, and sometimes it's from the employee perspective. So, and as you guys know, that mostly our employees are smiley employees. So if you let go of that employee, or even if you reduce your hours and you cut the hours, it's going to hit our smiley employees one way or the other. So that's another concern that we are looking at from the regional perspective. and the gas slowdown, I think that's a major part in it, because if people don't come and fill up the gas, there is no foot traffic coming inside the store, and because of that, it's reducing the sales inside the store as well. I'll pause over here, and I'll just wait for some questions towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair, for shedding that light on us about what is happening in the industry and with the convenience stores. And I think it's a right time to introduce our first panelist on there, who's been kind of monitoring from the National EPB Business Service side to look at the rise of the COVID-19 virus epidemic that is coming in, and what are the precautionary measures that each stores have to do. Now, there's a lot of things that are out there. I think NATA did a very great job of distributing their findings through their e-blast. But what we've done is we've also internally we've reached out to other major players like Wawas and Sheets and Armark of the world, who are multinational companies also, and seeing how they are handling epidemic in Europe and how they're handling it in the US. What are the precautionary measures? And we've come up with certain things that you already know a little bit of it, but we want to share a little bit of that. So with that, I would like to introduce Asif Rafani to come and share some light on what are the findings and what are the things that are going on, where and how is this going, and where do we do? Asif?
Yeah, hello to everybody. I just want to confirm that everyone can hear me. I'll go and share my screen if you guys are on a computer. If not, then I'm going to be talking about the thing that's on the screen as well. So, just a quick background. I already know that everyone is aware of this. I just want to make sure that everyone has a good understanding of it. That, what is a coronavirus? That it's actually a respiratory illness. It's passed on from person to person. How it gets infected, it basically goes from cough, from sneezes. It goes from, whenever you touch a contaminated surface, and then you either eat, either by touching your mouth, nose, or eyes. That's the common way that it spreads. So the reason that I go over some of these things is that if we have an understanding of how it spreads and what it is, then we can work towards preventing it. Common symptoms are fever, cough, shortness of breath. And the last one is, the biggest one that everyone is talking about is it life-threatening. According to the current estimates, approximately 98% of COVID-19 infections are not life-threatening. So that gives you some perspective. So as the number increases, that percent keeps changing. So I'm going to get started. So what we're focused on is, what can I do to protect my employees and customers? This is something that obviously all our employees are worried about. Everyone is doing all of the basic things. I wanted to go over some of the different things that have come up. Obviously maintaining the basic things, cleanliness, washing your hands, using hand sanitizer, covering your sneezes, all of those things definitely are there. As Chairman Rahim mentioned before, the guidelines sent out by NATA, that's an excellent guideline to follow. That's something that I was talking with Shanila, and that's the plan is to keep updating that on a weekly basis and sending that out. So some of these guidelines or suggestions that I have listed, we'll be hopefully incorporating those in there, the ones that make sense. And if there's any new guidelines that come up during that time, we'll be adding it and sending it out as well. So, one of the these are some of the things that some of the larger employers are doing, and this is something that we need to start following as well. Because keep in mind is that if there's, if we go into some sort of a lockdown mode, whatever that is, we'll be one of the few businesses that is still able to operate. So we do have a social responsibility of making sure to protect the public and to protect our employees as well. So if any employee has a fever equal or greater to 100.4, they should be encouraged to stay at home for at least 24 to 48 hours after the fever has subsided. Have a reminder to wash hands, use hand sanitizer frequently during your shift. Suggestions are even at every transition points. So if a cashier is going from a cashier to stocking to the cooler to going outside, so every position that the cashier changes, they should be, it gets very tedious to wash hands and your hands will dry out. So using a combination of washing hands, using hand sanitizer, lunch breaks, when you check in vendors, when you use a pen, these things sound really simple, something people do on a regular basis, but keep in mind that that's the way that the virus spreads is through your hands. So once you have it in your hand and then you touch your mouth, you eat something with it, you touch your eyes or your nose, that's how it spreads. Promoting routine environmental cleaning with disposable wipes. So moving away from the rags that we traditionally use, going to either paper towels or if there's disposable wipes, using that. Coming up with a sanitizing schedule every 3 hours or less for all touch points. This is mainly for the cashier's point of view. So you have registers, you have countertops, you have door handles. If you're in a cabin, making sure that you're hitting all the glasses. And if there's any other frequently used surfaces, we do have site credit card machines, we have phone card machines, money order machines, making sure that we're wiping those down with an approved disposable wipe. But making sure that schedule needs to be there, enforcing that so your employees are tracking, hey, that they did do this at every single shift, twice a shift would be a good practice. If there are any pictorial reminders that you can get off the internet that reminds them to cover their sneezes using a tissue, providing tissue and no touch receptacles. So not the ones that you have to push down. They're either going to be open or they will have an opening on the side. So they are not touching any part of the trash can when they're putting in, because once again, we're not necessarily cleaning the trash cans every few hours, right? One of the suggestions that I had heard is that if there's multiple POS, consider having one for credit only. So this is not saying that you're not accepting cash. This is saying that at this lane, you're only accepting credit card. So that way you are limiting potential exposure to other employees. I thought that was one of the ones that we can use. Avoiding long conversation with vendors and customers, that's pretty obvious, but sometimes customers do like to indulge in conversations. Even having a sign out there saying that you're COVID-19 proactive, listing all the things that you're doing to protect your employees, to protect the customers. The customers will appreciate that, knowing that that you do care about public safety. Sending a message to them that'll help, and it'll make them more cooperative in the efforts that you're trying to make. And obviously, we're going to be providing weekly guidelines for right now through NATA. Some of these will be updated in there, and if there's anything else that comes about, we'll be adding that in there as well. One of the other ones is, what if one of my employees feels sick? Request the employee to stay home and monitor their symptoms for 24 to 48 hours. If the symptoms worsen, employees should seek medical care. If they have gone to seek medical care, request them to get a work clearance from the medical provider, because a lot of times what's happening is that either it's the allergies or it's flu, but to protect your other employees, you want to make sure that that they are clear to come back to work. Do not risk infecting others by allowing them to come back to work too early. Make sure that you're observing a 14-day quarantine period if they're not able to get a return to work clearance from their medical doctor. This is one of the biggest ones is, what if one of my employees tests positive for the COVID-19? Larger employees obviously are issuing quarantine periods that may or may not be possible for us just because of the environment that we work in. We generally don't have a whole lot of overlaps, so we do have limited staff that we are working with. But if an employee is confirmed to have COVID-19, employers should inform fellow employees of their possible exposure to COVID-19 in the workplace, but maintain confidentiality as required with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Keep in mind is that just because one of the employees if they tested positive for COVID-19, that doesn't mean that the rest of the employees will, because the way that you contract it is if you touch a surface and then you didn't use a hand sanitizer and you either touch your nose, mouth, or eyes, nose, or mouth, that's the way that the other employee would contract it. So they're still considered medium to low risk if the proper guidelines were followed, if they were using hand sanitizer, if they were washing their hands, if all the surfaces were being wiped down properly, the other employees should be considered between a medium to a low risk. Their family members, the person who contracted the virus, they would be considered a high risk just because there's a lot more surfaces, a lot more things to do, and there's just a lot more exposure period at a home than it is at a workplace. And once again, you have to request a return to work clearance from the medical provider, making sure that they have followed that quarantine period or whatever the medical advice is. There are timelines for symptom progression. These are constantly changing. One example is that this is from the CDC, is that some healthcare professionals previously, if they had the COVID-19 virus, they were instructed to quarantine themselves for 14 days. Now, some of the guidelines are coming out is that, and in some of the professions, they can actually come back to work while they still have the virus, but there's some precautions they need to follow, such as wearing a mask, and there's some other precautions that they need to take. So they are allowed to come back to work if they feel well enough, even though they're confirmed to have COVID-19. Once again, these things are very changing. It's very specific. So I would not apply that in our field. I'm just using that as an example. One of the biggest things that people are doing is that retailers are adjusting their operating hours. Everyone knows that Walmart, Home Depot, the larger chains, they've all adjusted their hours just to make sure that they have proper staffing, that they don't have increased exposure. Right now, since there's a lot of people who are losing their job, people are looking for work now. So it may not be a bad idea to have some additional help, start a part-time, have some pool of workers. So if somebody does fall sick, you do have a pool of workers to go back to. That's all I have. Chairman Rahim, any questions on that? Did you want me to expand on anything?
So I think what we can do is, it was a great message, it's a great idea what you shared with us. I think what we'll do is we'll have some question and answers pretty much later on at the end of all the presentations, so we can then have a broader discussion amongst the entire panelists so that everyone can then chime in. If that's okay with you? So we'll just go to that one. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Asif, for doing that. And with this one that we kind of go through of how and what we have to do, and Vice Chair Karim also mentioned about it, what are the possibilities that we can do to help our cash flow and things on those natures? Well, I would like to invite David Jaffer, who is also an attorney, and Jacqueline Post to the panel, and kind of walk them through is what are the possibilities that a store owner can do in times like this to help its cash flow, and you have a slight drop in the sales part of it, where you're not at that much funding coming in. What are the alternatives? With that, David and Jacqueline, please welcome.
Yadimat, everyone. A couple of things. One, first of all, thank you, Rahim and his team, for putting this all together, and everyone that's on the attendance. And I think this is the ability to exchange information and push it downstream where it's really needed is a true testament to our community. So thank you all for arranging it. I do want to say that what Jackie and I are about to share with you is really for informational purposes. We're not here looking at a particular situation or giving a legal advice. So with that, we've heard some of the challenges, and then as a practitioner, our challenge is that we find ourselves in an unprecedented time where this pandemic is fundamentally changing the retail business. And in context of commercial real estate lease, we expect to see that the lease, the governing document that controls the relationship between landlord and tenant, to change in some form. And the nature and the extent of that change, and what I mean by change is a lease modification, remains to be seen as we fully get our hands around the new economic reality. Generally, it is said that in a commercial lease, landlords typically enjoy substantial leverage. But at times like this, with everything that has happened, landlords are also going to look for ways to protect their commercial interests. I think that is where the opportunity is for the retailers to maybe strike a deal with the landlord to modify their lease, to really manage their cash flow. Looking at it from the perspective of the landlord, what that means is you may be dealing with a landlord, or your members may be dealing with a landlord who has to, one, maintain the relationship and protect the relationship with his tenant. On the other hand, he's got to maintain his payment schedule if he's got a lender. So the landlord has to balance that interest. And, you know, when we look at our NATA membership and our retail operators, they may be on both ends of it. They may be landlord in some projects, and they may be tenant in other projects, those who operate multi-chain operations. So our focus is going to be limited to the lessees, but you will hear us at least reference in passing perspective of the landlord. So now looking at it from the perspective of the tenant, that means we have folks, the operators who are currently under stress from loss of revenues, from the government regulations that are unfolding, shutdown, limited hours, which we have seen across multiple jurisdictions. That's going to have an impact on how they manage their workflow, their employees, and more importantly, their cash flow. For them, when you have NATA chairman and NATA vice chair say we're seeing significant decline in revenue, that means it's a matter of survival. So in order to really control their cash flow, they're either going to have to increase the revenue, which is very difficult to do, or cut down their expenses. And lease payment is one of the bigger expenses that they have. And so what, so the questions that you may get in the leadership position is, what can tenants do to deal with reducing the financial pressure? So we want to focus on that point of view, and we want to focus on lease modification. You already know that certain jurisdictions have invoked a moratorium against eviction. Most of that relate to residential leases. They haven't really kind of bled over into commercial leases. There are a couple of jurisdictions that actually include a prevention for 90 days of the commercial leases, but we don't see that as far and wide as we see the residential lease eviction moratorium. So, we have that in place. So what Jackie and I did earlier is we've kind of created a 4-step framework for you to use as a points of discussion when you deal with the inbound calls. And so I'll do a couple of steps, and Jackie will take over the other 2 steps. So, the step number 1 is we have to identify the parties that are involved in the transaction. And, for us, you may say, well, it's just the landlord and tenant, and that may be the case. But we may also have a lease situation where the landlord has a bank that has financed the property, so we're dealing with the lender. So whatever agreement the landlord and tenant make, we may need a consent of the landlord. So it would be a good idea to, if you can, and if you are a landlord in certain place, make sure that you're addressing all the stakeholders. So we can have a landlord, a tenant, and a lender, but we can also have one more property, at least that's kind of common in our community, where we give our operations for management. We may be dealing with a sublease, parica type of thing, right? So we need to now account for that party. We could potentially be dealing with either 2 parties, 3 parties, or 4 parties. So whatever this framework that we're about to give you, identifying the relationship, it's important that we identify all the stakeholders, because there's no point in negotiating and coming out with a deal only to leave out one party who doesn't consent. So once you've identified what type of transaction you have and how many parties you have, the second step is to look over the lease, the governing document. The tenant and landlord should both review the documents and pay particular attention to the provisions that deal with the landlord-tenant responsibility in the unforeseen or unforeseeable circumstances. Certainly this isn't foreseeable. So we are on this uncharted territory. So those provisions may help the business operator negotiate a deal. So once you identify what rights you have under the knowledge, and in this case, knowledge is power, and the more knowledge you have, I think the better bargaining position you're in. And as you are reviewing, or as you're suggesting to your operators to review the governing document, also make sure that you tell them to take a look at their insurance policy. They may have some insurance policy that kind of kicks in, and that may be able to help. I think maybe Jacqueline can probably talk a little bit about that when she takes on. So again, so the 2 steps are, the first one is make sure that we understanding who's involved in the transaction. Second, read the governing document. We do have a draft document that you can share with your members. They can basically put their names, their landlord's name. And what that document is, it's a starting point where I think Chairman of NATA said, as a landlord, Gamma being the landlord, they just received a notice from one of their tenants. That is step number 1. So this has to start with step number 1, which is when you put the landlord on notice that, look, things are changing, our business is affected, we're monitoring the situation, and we may need to invoke certain reprieve under our lease. So those are at least a couple of things to think about, and the 2 points that I have. Jackie, do you want to take over some of the other suggestions for the group?
Sure. Thank you, David. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for having me on the call this evening. Just to briefly recap what David mentioned, the purpose of the conversation is to really give you all tools that you can use toward reducing your lease payments or asking for a deferment for a period of months. Like David mentioned, we put together a 4-step overview of ideas that you might be able to use as part of your toolbox to get to that point. David mentioned that for step number 1, you would identify the parties involved. Step number 2, review the documents that govern your lease and maybe an operating agreement if that's also relevant. Step 3 that I'm going to speak about next is put it in writing and communicate. And then the last step, step 4, is to offer potential solutions that could make a resolution easier for you and your landlord and maybe any other parties that might be involved. So that's step 3, put it in writing and communicate. The purpose of this step is to say that talking to your landlord and or your lender is not enough. In most leases, there will be a clause that you'll see called a force majeure clause. And what that really means is that if there is something that happens that's unanticipated, like this pandemic, that dramatically impacts your business or the landlord's business, that you can potentially terminate your lease. Those clauses usually do not exempt you from paying rent. Each clause stands on its own. They're each individual, and you would need to review your clause with maybe your attorney to see what yours specifically says. But it's important to recognize that these clauses exist. And if it doesn't exist, there are other legal doctrines generally that say if it's impossible for you to operate because something has happened outside of your agreement, like an act of God or a government shutdown, for example, that you can put your landlord on notice of that and tell them that you need relief. So what we thought would be a good idea for this overview is to say that you should send your landlord a written notice that explains how your business is impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. And we put together a few different templates depending on the type of business that you have or that your members have. So there are retail, industrial, warehouse, and office letter templates that you can use as a starting point to communicate with your landlord. And those templates basically say exactly what we've been saying. You're putting your landlord on notice that you have this issue, that you need to discuss a rent reduction or a deferment. And then it also gives you a space where you can tell them how much your business has declined year over year and month over month. And it's important to include that information because you're showing that you actually have dramatically decreased. When you send these letters out, we recommend that you follow whatever notice requirements you have in your lease. You can also send an email copy. You should also call your landlord if you haven't already once that letter is on the way and let them know and say, hey, I sent this letter. I need this notice period to start. I also want to talk to you about this and see how we can come to an agreement for something that'll work for both of us. So you're changing the dynamic of the relationship from a challenging one to a more productive one. If the letter goes there without the phone call, then it might be harder for you to get a positive negotiation started. So that's step number 3. Step number 4 is to offer a potential solution for lease modification, like reducing your rent, that sort of thing. So there are different negotiation theories about how you can do this. And different folks in different areas will have different operational challenges. For example, some leases will have requirements that the tenants stay open during certain times for a certain number of hours, and other locations, like was discussed earlier, are under forced government shutdowns. So like I've experienced situations where clients have said to me, well, my landlord is shutting down my building and I can't operate there, so what do I do? So I think the first thing is that if you have a required operating provision under your lease and you can't or don't want to stay open, that as a tenant, you would start by asking your landlord to consider suspending that operating provision. And that's a good way to open the door to the bigger conversation. And you can also let them know about the letter that's on the way. And you can basically say to the landlord that you need to enter into a short-term arrangement for as long as this national emergency is in place and until the economy is back on its feet and businesses are operating as usual. And you want that landlord to provide you with a partial or a full rent abatement. You could ask to create a new payment plan with that landlord. That could include if you want to stay in the lease and try and make it work after, after things ease up a bit in the future. You could extend your term maybe for a reduced rent. You can also try and ask the landlord, like David had mentioned, there are some insurance opportunities out there that the landlord might have if the tenants don't. There's something called business interruption insurance, and there are some riders that go along with that might pay the landlord for lost rent or lost business income, and the same on the tenant side. So if you think you might have that coverage, you should definitely check into it. And whether or not you do, as a tenant, you have the right to ask your landlord whether or not they have that coverage and whether that coverage would apply here. Because if that does, that will give you relief from having to pay the rent for that period. So step number 4 is to offer potential solutions. So those are a bunch of different options that you can try to cover with your landlord. You can also try offering other out-of-the-box solutions that might give the landlord a win-win. If you have a service that you think the landlord could use, you could offer them that service or that product at cost in return for a rent reduction. You never know who might be open to it. So these are all high-level thoughts about how to move forward with asking for a rent reduction or deferment. And, something that had been mentioned earlier with mortgages, I think it's also important to note here that there are other financial assistance options that might give you more bandwidth or give your members more bandwidth to float financially, even if they can't get a rent reduction right away. And that could be on the residential side if you're carrying a mortgage or a lease. If you have a mortgage, car payments, credit card overhead, call those companies and ask for payment reductions or deferments. A lot of companies are doing that now under direction from the U.S. Treasury without impact to credit scores. Definitely double check that, but that's a good option. There are a lot of federal assistance programs. There are SBA loans that are getting up and running at no interest for small businesses that qualify. I understand the Jamaat is also potentially putting options out there that might be helpful. So in addition to these commercial steps, consider the personal things that your folks can do that might also help them in this time. So just to quickly recap, the 4 recommended steps are identify the parties involved, review the governing documents, open communications in writing, and then offer potential solutions for a modification. So thank you. And Raheem, I think that concludes this part until the Q&A.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I just want to mention one thing, that David, being an attorney, came up with a disclaimer before he even said one word. So that was kind of interesting to get to it. But thank you, David, for doing that. With all this that we heard for right now and what we heard from you, which was really great, and I'm seeing all the questions flaring to me personally and to the chat. There is one more topic that I wanted to touch before I opened up for Q&A. I know we are running a little bit over, but was with the things that we talked about, as Chairman and Vice Chair mentioned, that the counties are closing down, cities are closing down, states are putting a lockdown on that, and they're letting emergency services or emergency-related businesses to stay open. And there are 4 that come into that category, and that is the convenience stores, and the gas stations is one of them. The second is a grocery store. Third is a pharmacy, and 4th is a bank, is what I remember. And out of these 4, anyone that, if you look at it, Walmart's cut their hours to 6 o'clock. Publix has cut down, or the grocery stores have cut down to 6 o'clock. Banks are now only a drive-through, and they close down at 5. So in the twilight area, or go back beyond, it is only a convenience store or a gas station that may be the only thing that is open out there. That also gives you a pros and cons that, okay, yeah, you may think that that is a great idea of having more business, but then you become the most vulnerable target that is out there because you're the only one open. And if everyone knows that you are the one open, then definitely you're going to know that there is some business going on, if there is any, or there may be not any, but that opens up to really a threat or a risk for us where safety and security is concerned. So that was one of the questions that I may open up the Q&As also. And I would give it to Sabrina, and please chime in with all these questions. Is with the safety and security, I would like the chairman and vice chair to just think what are the precautionary measures that each TA has been doing, has done in the past, and would like to reinforce it or reiterate that same thing back to their store owners of what is going on. So could you share some light on that? Chairman Mehdi, you there? Vice Chair Karim?
I wonder if they're muted.
Oh, you were muted. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Please.
So as in TAs, we had requested members to shut down earlier. I mean, some of the members are following it, but some are still feeling that their business still are on. I mean, that they're still busy till night, so they are not changing their hours. But we try to send another announcement, maybe another request to membership, and maybe they can do this. That will help their employees, and of course, safety is very important at the night. As you know, if it's less people out there, then it's dangerous for the employees out there, and the businesses are at the risk. Of course, they will be easy targeted areas. So at this point, I think I don't see much. Many stores are closing earlier, but of course, few are because whatever they make the decision. So as a TA, we always try to send the guidelines to membership, and then if they follow through stuff like this, it's just benefit for them. And if they don't do that, we don't force it for whatever reason, because if they have a couple of coverage and safety and security out there, whatever they think, then we don't force those stuff. I don't know, vice chair can also add in their areas and all that too. So
Okay, all right. So, sorry, go ahead.
I'd just like to add one thing, Chairman Saab, is, earlier we were talking this morning or this afternoon in some of the conversation that we were having that members who has location which are 24 hours locations, they never, thought about closing down their location at nighttime. So let's just suppose if they want to cut hours or if they want to close down their location for nighttime because they're not getting enough foot traffic at nighttime and it's not really worth opening the locations at nighttime. Usually those kind of location does not have alarm system or does not even have a key to the store to lock their store. So I think this is one of the things that member needs to understand. And I think we as an EC of each institution, we need to send this message out that we need to work on that, whether we need to talk to any vendors, alarm vendor from a national level, or if TAs are working at a local level with their particular vendors who has alarm companies. So I think this is something we need to look at because I'm pretty sure not a lot of people are thinking about alarm system and also about the keys to the store because their store never closes if they were 24 hours. And now for some reason, if they have to close, then this would be a hurdle. And if there are no alarm system in the store, then the store is wide open at nighttime for any break-ins, which the member will never know. So I think this is one of the points that I would like to relate to the entire ECs over here from different trade associations that we need to think about that and make sure that the members understand if they want to close down at nighttime, what steps they need to take.
Perfect. Great suggestions. Sabrina, do you have any other questions that you've got on the chat?
So we've had a lot of questions come through on the chat. Some were shared privately and others were in the group chat. So panelists, at this time I am going to direct these questions towards you. The first one we've received is, what are the new FMLA laws, the Family and Medical Leave Act laws? Are employers responsible for paid sick leave if we are shut down? David or Jacqueline, would you happen to know anything on the FMLA laws currently?
Yeah, Jackie, do you want to take it?
I can take part of it, but I have to say, just as a disclaimer, that really does fall under employment law, not necessarily real estate. So I'm far from an expert. I will tell you that right now, from what I'm hearing, a lot of those requirements are state driven. There is not a federal mandate yet. I could be wrong. If something's come out in the last half of today, I wouldn't know. I've heard, for example, in California, that employers of certain sizes are required to provide 2 weeks of paid sick leave. Some larger companies have taken it upon themselves to do the same. But as far as FMLA goes, that's different than paid sick leave. And I believe that FMLA stands on its own. There's also kind of a wrinkle in terms of OSHA, which is the safety and like health oversight of businesses. If there is a safety concern for operating, if you're afraid of the virus spreading in your workplace, that may also come into play. So I'm sorry, I can't get more specific than that, but I would say check with your local state to see what is going on. And I'm happy to help with any specific questions offline. If for no other reason, we can route it to the legal folks and see if they can help us find answers.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, one of the lawyers in my firm has been tracking the federal legislation, and we sent a newsletter out. I think we shared it with NATA. So if there's interest, we'll push that out. And that actually deals with the changes as to which employers are affected, which employees are covered, the size of your employment, the safe harbor that, or the exclusion that are about to come down the pike. So that's there. It's a one-page newsletter. I think it's written in a way that folks could understand. The primary concern behind writing that newsletter and pushing it out is we don't want to have our operators in a position where they violate federal laws under the national emergency. And when we come out of this thing, 4 months, 5 months, whenever we come out of it, they are now facing lawsuit for violating federal law. So that was the idea behind it. And yeah, we can share that information. They are specific. And so, yeah, we'll push that out. But yeah, we'll get it over to you. Yeah, there are rules.
Again, Jackie and David, another question that's kind of in your wheelhouse is, what would be instructional to understand from the asset owner and landlord's perspective about rent deferral negotiations and its process? And how should it be approached while minimizing the shock to their lenders and stakeholders?
So seasoned landlords who do this for a living and who have done this for a long time value rent-paying tenants. These are the same folks that will do what's necessary to help their tenant when the tenant is good. The biggest headache a landlord has is on the commercial side is rent payment. So if you have an operator with a good history, I think your landlord's going to want to work with you. I think that should be the starting point. Yeah, you may have some folks that don't care for that, but by you know, wide and far, you're going to have landlords that are going to want to cooperate. How you should start, I think, is kind of what we talked about earlier. And I think Jackie made a very good point that yes, the template is available to you. You can use it. Not only just send it, but pick up the phone and say, look, I'm sending you the letter. You know, we're impacted. I'll give you a chance to read the letter, and perhaps we can talk about what we can do to work together to come up with a solution that works for you and it works for my business. So I think that should be, I mean, that's what I would recommend to my clients.
I agree. And the only other minor thing I have to add to that is that, you know, when you look at this, you can't look at it in a vacuum. Your landlord or the landlord at issue, the asset manager, they know they don't have any other good alternatives. No one is signing new leases for commercial properties right now. Credit is questionable. they're going to hopefully do what they can to keep you in the property and get you operating well as quickly as possible. And like David said, most reputable, good landlords understand that even if they try and force you to pay rent, if you can't pay it, there's no point in pushing you toward insolvency. So they should work with you.
All right, the next question that we have is, so I do want to let everybody on the line know that we will be emailing recordings of today's webinar, as well as give you access to the letter templates from David and from Jacqueline. So those were some questions in the chat box. I just want to address that we will be providing those, and we will be providing copies of Asif's presentation as well. Another question that has come across is, with everything shutting down, how will the supply chain be in the future? I think this is a question more directed towards Chairman Mehdi and Chairman Karim, and maybe with some input from Rahim and Asif.
So let me start with that. Because of the influx of, or a big sale that just went through in the past week, and there are not like all items are out. There are a few items that are very, very much which is out, and it's very scarce to get right now. We said that all companies are currently manufacturing it at full pace. Now, again, there are some stuff that was only procured from China, and everything is stopped from, or it's come very slow because they have to test the container. So it's becoming a really, really slow to get those kind of products back into the market. So you will see that a little bit. I think is going to be a time for that short period of time that you're going to see that, because I've been talking to a lot of manufacturers in the U.S. From the NAC supply board side, and they're all saying the same thing, because they're either the spare parts are coming from China or that's coming from China. And what I'm hearing that all the factories are now slowly started gearing up back in China to start producing this stuff. So you will see that coming. That's what I think is going to take a little bit longer time than I think. But I think Chairman Mehdi and Vice Chair Karim can talk a little bit more about from their perspective.
No, I think you're right, Chairman. I think I agree with you. I think it's going to be a little while, but I think we should not see a huge problem in the future. Even right now, I don't think the supply chain is a whole lot of problem for many items that we carry in C-store. Besides a few items, of course, sanitizer, toilet paper and stuff like that are like gold today to get to. But I think going in the future, I think that will get better as China comes back on their feet and start manufacturing those things and sending it out.
All right, the next question that I have is regarding franchise agreements and negotiations on royalties. How can we negotiate with your franchises on royalties or getting out of an agreement for a franchise, given the current economic situation?
Jackie, you want to take that?
Sure. So I think that, just like everything else, this depends on who your franchisor is and the extent of your relationship with them. I recently dealt with this with a colleague who she got to the point where her landlord would not work with her on reducing her rent. And she actually went to her franchisor and said, I am either going to fold my business or walk. Would you like to participate with me? And they wanted to step in and work with her. So I wouldn't assume that you are at odds with your franchisor. It might make sense to call them, discuss your royalty situation, your drop in sales. They're probably expecting it at this point. If you want to terminate your agreement with them and stop operations at the location, I would ask the franchisor if they're open to stepping in. They might be to preserve their brand. And it would be helpful to have your landlord on board to basically assign your lease to them. And the franchisor would be more apt to do that if you had an operation in place, but you had it paused financially, if you're able to get a rent reduction or a deferment for a few months to wait out what's going on now. So I would say to try and work both angles at the same time, but maybe not sign anything until you know where both the landlord is and your franchisor in terms of whether, you know, how likely they are to work with you. David, did I miss anything?
No, I think it's good. And I think it really, you know, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people. Yes, you may have a franchise agreement and it may have certain provisions, but, you know, if you have a sour relationship and you are trying to use this time of national emergency to say, well, we want to breach the agreement, I think for the most part, people are going to see for what it is. But if you truly have a dispute and if you truly feel that, you know, your franchisee has not done enough to help you, then yes, you can look for those provisions. So I think the franchisees are, I think at a time like this, you're going to seek cooperation, because I really think the judges don't want to deal with landlord bringing tenants in eviction a month from now when the courts are back up and running. They don't want to see this kind of disposition. They're going to be very suspicious to those kind of cases. So my sense is your business partners are going to cooperate. And if it turns into something more than that, where you've got lawyers involved, hopefully lawyers will counsel their clients that perhaps they need to move forward with some degree of caution.
I have two questions from two different attendees, but they're kind of similar, so I'm going to put them together. It's how is the retail sector affected in China and Europe after the crisis? And a second question that's subsequent to that is, a lot of cigarette companies are shutting down, are closing down. Supplies are a problem. How will we deal with this all?
Chairman Mary? Vice Chair?
So let me take a stab at that right now. And I think I shared that that email, and I think everyone here on the call must have received that. That Philip Morris is closing its company down in Richmond, their plants right down there for right now for the COVID virus. So that's going to create a confusion right there. There was the vapor ban that came in, where that was kind of controlled. Most of the parts that were made in China have slowed down. So your supply chain is going to be impacted even here when it was manufactured here, because of factories are closing down for some time to get this virus things taken care of it, because I think Philip Morris had 2 of their employees turn positive for the COVID-19. So you're going to see that impact, you know. But what has happened is whatever these sales were, I was talking to one of the presidents of another TA. They have a warehouse, and their sales just today had shot like crazy up there, because it was the cigarette order that came in. As soon as the notes came in, everyone came in and pulled it out, and it was done. That's going to happen. So eventually that's going to become another commodity that's going to become a little scarce to get, and it's going to be smarter to procure some, but you got to be very careful, because if the lockdown happens, there's no one on the street also to buy that stuff. So you got to be very careful how you're going to hold your cash right now, because cash flow is one of the key components, is a survival or a live stream or a bloodstream for a small business. If you don't have cash flow, you're going to be in deep problems to pay your bills at home. So take care of that. Be very careful and mindful of where you're putting your money and how soon can you turn it around. That's my comments on that. But if Chairman Mehdi can, or Vice Chair can share some more lights on that, that would be nice to hear.
I see a comment here from Chairman saying he can't unmute on his end.
Oh, again, let me try. Okay. Okay, he's unmuted.
Yes, now I can, I think, talk. Thank you, Chairman. So Chairman is right. I think I was also urged to all this team here and then even our members that don't get panic on the stuff that you cannot control, right? So if you can't get cigarettes, you can't get cigarette, right? I mean, to worry about right now on that end, it's going to be hurt your business down the road, because if something happened serious, and the chairman is right that cigarette is a big money, and if you lock down, then how are you going to sell that product anyhow? So just to be safer side, yeah, keep your stocks for weeks or 2 weeks. That's that's a good strategy. But we're worrying about right now what happening out there is going to be make more frustration amongst the group and members, and that's what is happening even at the retail side, right? That's what I want to share, that at a Gamma warehouse we shut down cash and carry because of people were coming in like uh, you know a number of people coming under one time, and then they try to get all this stuff out, right? So employees were not feeling safer and all that, so we completely shut down cash and carry, and put everything on the delivery. And then we give the one more option to member and customers that they can place another order. So they can place 2 orders a week. One is going to be delivered to them, and the other order will be pulled up by the employees at the warehouse, and they can come and pick it up once the order is ready. They will get a text or email that their order is ready. They can go there and then just pick it up from the door. So they are not allowed inside the warehouse. So stuff like that. Right now, everybody is like just like all the consumers out there. Whatever they can get, they are picking up and stocking up at home. Retail side doing same thing, that whatever we get getting from warehouses or our suppliers, we want to stock it all at one time. And that's, I think, create more frustration and more panicking in even amongst the members, where our members are talking each other day to day. Hey, I'm getting this stuff from here or that stuff from there. And then other thing very important is to pass the message on to your friends or family or who are in the business, that there are a lot of vendors out there. They're reaching to stores and try to sell like sanitizers and stuff there. I don't know that those products are genuine or not genuine, but because of the demand of those items, people are out there to sell to the retailers also. So just to be careful, right? Because if they sell you a higher price and you are margining it up and try to sell more higher than what your cost is, then you might get caught in price gouging. And then if you don't have the invoice, then how are you going to prove that, or take a protection for your business? So stuff like that. I think of course the challenge is for everybody. It's not for me or it's for you. It's if a cigarette will be shortage, or any supply chain will be short any product, then it's for everybody. So I think at this point, just wait and see what can we do, and we can do our best. That's our efforts are.
Thank you, Chairman Saib. The next question we have is for Asif. Asif, where are you getting all your information from in regards to the virus and hygiene? Is it reliable? And what does low or medium risk mean when they're talking about it on the news? Asif?
He's probably on mute.
I show him. He's not on mute. I just don't know if he's stepped away from the phone or. Hello, Asif? Okay, we can come back to him. That was a question directed towards him. If I can get him back on the line, or if he hears me, then we'll address it. If not, An email will be sent to all the participants with the questions and answers, as well as a recording of the messages. And I've made a note of individual requests for some of Asif's presentations. So I will be addressing that as well. Okay, I have Asif back on the line. Asif? Asif Soprani? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I was trying to unmute. Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. What was the question I had?
Asif, the question was directed towards you, and as the information that you've presented today in your presentation, where were you getting that from? What is the source? And what does low or medium risk mean in terms of how the employers are dealing with their employees?
Okay. So all of that information, well, most of that information came from the CDC, and some of the other information came from Aramark, and some of their communications that they've had with their and some other retailers. But a lot of the information that I mentioned about the disease, how to prevent it, and things like that, all that information came from the CDC website. And when we talk about the low risk versus the medium risk, that has to do with the line of work that you're in, and your possible exposure to a person who may be infected, and also has to do with the precautions that are being taken. So the reason that an employee working in a store next to someone who contracted the virus would be medium to low is because that they're not living with them. So like I mentioned on the call, that if they were living with them, you know, their immediate family would be considered at high risk. Does that answer that question, or you want me to elaborate?
I think you're good. Thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to thank our speakers today for their time and their expertise in their fields. I'd like to thank the leadership of our Jamaat and our institutions and our trade associations for taking the time out to join our call and for being an active participant in today's webinar. I know it was short notice, so I really want to send out my deep appreciation to our Jamaati members and our leadership for taking time to attend this webinar. Copies of this webinar, a recording of it, as well as answers to the questions and answers will be sent out after this event. We'll be putting those together, reviewing them, and then sending them out shortly. I'd like to thank everyone again for attending, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.